US President Donald Trump's tariff regime may have left a lot of losers, from small, poor countries like Laos and Algeria to wealthy US trading partners like Canada and Switzerland. But what about American consumers who will see prices rise once the tariffs take hold? There is much to talk about. Let's get straight to our panel. Douglas Sloan is a Democratic strategist and a principal at the National Capital Strategy Group. Sourabh Gupta is a senior Asia-Pacific International Relations Policy Specialist with the Institute for China-America Studies. Also with us is Mary C. Curtis. She's a columnist for Roll Call and host of the Equal Time podcast. And Anthony Chan served as chief economist for JPMorgan Chase. Thanks, everyone, for being with us. Anthony Chan, let me start with you. So let's take a look at the impact these tariffs are going to have on American consumers. We have an idea because Yale University put out a research report which says that Americans will face an average of 18%, that's $2,400 a year, as I mentioned earlier on imported goods once the tariffs take hold. Question is, what kind of impact are these kinds of increases going to have on the broader economy as well as on things like inflation?
That all you have to do is look at the growth numbers for 2025 for the U.S. versus 2024. In 2024, the U.S. economy grew by 2.8%, and this year the IMF is telling us that growth is going to be about 1.9%. I actually believe the growth is going to be weaker, something closer to 1.5%. So far the tariffs has told us two things. One, that prices tend to go up, and we've already started to see a lot of the goods in the consumer price index that are mostly imported rising leaps and bounds over the normal or average consumer price index. We also know from the study you cited from the Budget Lab that now is telling us that the effective tax rate is higher, over 18%, which is about 8 times larger than it was at the beginning of the year, that it's going to cost the average household more than $2,000. And guess what? The lower income individuals have a higher marginal propensity to consume, which means they consume a bigger share of their income. So it's a regressive impact on the economy. So not only will it slow economic growth, raise prices to some extent, but it will also have a disproportionate effect on lower income and middle income individuals.
Right, and Anthony, if we see that kind of slow growth and prices rising, what kind of practical effect can we see in terms of employment, in terms of the stresses that companies will face at that time?
Well, I think it's pretty clear. You just got the latest employment report, which shows that non-farm payrolls are growing by an average of 35,000 over the last 3 months. That's a significantly low number, which suggests that the labor market is starting to slow. We also saw the duration of unemployment, or the average number of weeks that a person that's unemployed needs to find their next job, is at the highest level that we've seen this year. Does it mean we're going to get a recession? Not really, but it means we're going to slow down the economy. Polymarket, which is an international betting site, is now placing the odds of a recession this year at around 15%, which is, by the way, normal. So I think we get slower growth. We don't get a recession. We don't get hyperinflation, but we get somewhat higher inflation. So the effects are negative, but they're not drastic at this stage.
Mary, great to see you. Welcome back to the show. There's been a great deal of disinformation or misinformation about what's going on, Mary. I mean, we see President Trump, he continues to make the point that it's these foreign countries that will pay for the tariffs. Well, that is only partly true, and that is if the exporters in those countries decide to eat up some of the cost. But it will be US consumers largely that will pay for these tariff increases in the form of new taxes. Do you think American consumers are aware of this? What kind of impact is it going to have?
I think it'll be a shock to many. We'll remember that Donald Trump got a lot of votes promising to bolster the economy from people who are frustrated by high costs, by inflation, and now they're going to be hit. We have the holiday season, before that, back to school season, and a lot of them will feel that shock. And at the same time, as the previous guest said, we see unemployment creeping up, which is no surprise. We have a lot of federal workers, of course, that have lost their jobs, and small businesses are going to be hurt by the tariffs as well, because of course, a lot of their goods came and they will have to eat it, and their profit margins were slim as it is. So I think the American people will see it pretty quickly, and they'll wonder, why isn't he keeping these promises he made that we would have a lot more money in our pockets? And so there will be some political effects from this. Now, it's true that Donald Trump, the folks who follow him and follow his administration and are big supporters, really believe a lot of what he says. And we see when he fired the head of the Bureau of Labor Statistics, that a lot of them were saying, well, yes, the numbers were cooked, but all the experts are saying, no, this is a team and numbers are numbers, and these are realistic. So when they see it in their pocketbooks, that's when they'll say, oh, well, maybe he wasn't the guru, the art of the deal, the successful businessman that was going to make my life better. And he's playing with these tariffs, the art of the deal, making deals with these countries, saying we're going to get the cold, hard cash.
Yeah.
But countries have learned how to deal with Donald Trump and how to promise him things. And it, without an enforcement mechanism, maybe they won't come to be. So, yes, I think we'll see what happens if they turn on him politically, many of the American people who voted for him, but they'll certainly see it in their pocketbooks.
And Mary, one other quick point. Is it going to be the lower income groups in the country that are going to be hit worst with these tariff increases? People, for instance, who shop at a place like Walmart?
Yes, because we know a lot of their goods are from foreign countries. And you see that the minority, and particularly African-American, unemployment rate was ticking up pretty high, higher than it's been in quite a while. And I'm not saying that that equals lower income necessarily, but all folks of all races of lower income who are forced to shop at some of these shops, and a lot of them in rural areas, they don't have a lot of alternatives of places they can shop. So yes, the lower income, as usual, will be hit by these tariffs the hardest, I believe.
Right. Douglas Sloan, Mary just mentioned the fact that President Trump fired the person who's responsible for issuing the country's labor numbers. That's after she issued a report that the administration felt was very disappointing as far as jobs were concerned. That is a risky business, firing a person who issues numbers like this. These are career civil servants who do that job. And this is how the former Treasury Secretary, Larry Summers, responded to what Trump did. Let's listen.
These numbers are put together by teams of literally hundreds of people following detailed procedures that are in manuals. There's no conceivable way that the head of the BLS could have manipulated this number. The numbers are in line with what we're seeing from all kinds of private sector sources. This is really scary stuff, and it can hardly be surprising that when the rule of law is a bit in question, that there's a big uncertainty premium in the markets that is operating to both make there be less investment, which slows the economy down, and also means there's less supply so that there's more inflationary pressure.
So, Douglas, the BLS that Larry Summers referred to there is the Bureau for Labor Statistics. Looking at this Trump action, what kind of consequence is it going to have? I mean, is it going to put a huge question mark over the credibility of numbers like, important numbers, vital numbers like this issued by the U.S. government?
Absolutely. Trump is essentially killing the messenger in this regard. And like the former speaker just said, the head of Bureau of Labor Statistics isn't the only one that controls these numbers. This is controlled by a team of many people that put these numbers together. The head of the BLS doesn't see these numbers until the very last minute, maybe like 12 hours before or less, that they are released. And, Trump has a history of doing this. When he was president during COVID, he didn't like the COVID numbers. So what did he say? Stop testing people, stop bringing these numbers forward. When I remember when there was a hurricane coming through, and he had said, oh, it's going to be a big danger, I think, to some of the states off the Gulf. And he drew with a little Sharpie. He extended the path of the hurricane to fit his narrative. When he wanted to attack Iran, and the assessment of his military advisors showed that there was not any effort to build a nuclear bomb in Iran. What did he do? He went and got another assessment from another list of military intelligence, more military intelligence. So he has a history of doing this. And yes, this can be a very bad outcome because as we've seen in other, and I say other, I was getting ready to say other authoritarian regimes. We're not an authoritarian regime, but this is the beginning of an authoritarian regime. In Turkey, in Venezuela, in Greece, when they put their sycophants in there to fudge these numbers, you end up with a recession. You end up with hyperinflation. The Fed bases their policies off these numbers. So this could be a very bad outcome for the United States in general. And, the Bureau of Labor Statistics is the gold standard here. It would behoove us not to mess with our current formula. And that is exactly what Trump is doing.
Sourabh Gupta, what are your thoughts on this? President Trump says that he will name a replacement for the commissioner in the next few days. But what is your view of the president firing, as I said, a career servant, because he didn't like what was reported? I mean, how will this be seen around the world? I mean, there are investors around the world who look at these numbers.
They're going to see it with apprehension. I mean, is Donald Trump trying to take America down the line of being a banana republic? Those are sort of the questions they're going to be thinking. What is the integrity of other U.S. data which is going to be put out? We'll have to see who the pick is to fill that position, and it just raises a whole set of questions with regard to Mr. Trump's intentions, whether the institutions, the U.S. government institutions, are solid enough to cope with this sort of pressure. My view is they will bend, but they will not buckle. The U.S. institutions will carry through. But on something as critical as underlying data, and I mean, the U.S. puts out reams and reams and reams of quality data across many, many bureaucracies and departments. And if those start getting called into question, it opens up an enormous can of worms in terms of trusting the U.S. as just an investment destination, I think, at the end of the day.
Anthony Chan, the president will announce separate tariffs on imports of pharmaceuticals, semiconductors, crucial minerals, and other products soon. Will these sort of soften the impact of these tariffs?
Yeah, those products will in fact suffer from those tariffs, and that will just put a bigger burden on the overall U.S. economy because it's been proven that tariffs increase prices and slow economic growth. I just want to say one thing about the firing of the BLS. I just wrote a Substack article on that topic that I wrote yesterday, and what I find is that the number of respondents to that survey has gone down from about 60% to 42%. So the quality of that data is not as good as it used to be because less people are responding to the survey. And also the government has cut back so much that in inflation adjusted terms, the Bureau of Labor Statistics has less money. So nobody will argue that the quality has suffered. But to say that somehow the numbers were fixed or rigged, that's absolutely preposterous because those numbers go through so many different quality tests before they're released that those numbers are pristine in nature. Can we make the numbers a lot more accurate or a lot more robust? Yes, we can, but that's not what the discussion was about.
Mary, how is this all going to play out politically? I mean, we've been told that, the impact of these tariffs are limited right now. We haven't seen the full impact of them. But how big a political issue will it become in the months ahead?
Well, I believe, yes, it will. When people, cold hard numbers and how much your paycheck is how much far it can go, particularly, as I said, when you have these big spending times coming up from back to school to the holidays, and that's when people will notice it. As I said, though, Donald Trump has a very strong and loyal base, and they are willing to go with him pretty far down the road. But I think because there are other distractions where they're starting to mistrust him in other ways, from the Epstein files to his changing foreign policy, some other areas, that they might start, some of even folks who voted for him very proudly and strongly will start to wonder and start to mistrust him even more if they don't see the results, because he promised a lot of things quickly, from ending wars to bringing down the price of things. And I think also a lot of people are starting to see a lot of his moves as distractions. And when you're struggling in your pocketbook and you see him building a $200 million ballroom in the White House, so I think it's not happening in a vacuum, this mistrust. And this just adds to it. It would be, one of his slogans is promises made, promises kept. And if some of these promises are broken and folks can't trust them, then perhaps he will pay a political cost. And you can see that he's probably wondering this himself. I believe his move to encourage Texas to rig its districts so that they would squeeze some more seats out of it, not in a census year, I might add, the 60th year anniversary of the Voting Rights Act, means that even he thinks, I might have some weaknesses politically, so I want to make sure I can shore up my support and my Republican base as much as possible. But those moves also mean that his opposition will get stronger. And you can see that in some of the demonstrations and protests that are happening, and some of the Democratic moves to fight back in a way that perhaps they didn't in Trump 1.0 in his first term. So we'll have to wait and see how much of a political cost it will be. And of course, we have the midterms coming up very quickly next year, and that will be a test of how strong the Trump brand is and the Republican brand is.
Douglas, to Mary's point, how do Democrats fight back? I mean, how do they look at things like Trump firing the civil servant who is responsible for the jobs numbers, the fact that he keeps on saying that other countries will be paying for these tariffs? How do they use that?
Yeah, I'm at a loss as to how anyone is believing Trump at this point, saying that other countries will pay for these tariffs, and people are plainly aware at this stage in the game that no, it's going to be U.S. citizens that pay for the tariffs, just like Mexico was never going to pay for that wall, just like he wasn't able to end the war in Russia as soon as he got into office. The last speaker brought up a very good point. Mary brought up a very good point when she says all of this is undermining his credibility within his base. And we see it right now. Trump has a 37% approval rating and a 58% disapproval rating. I think that's the lowest in modern presidential history. All of these promises that have been broken are starting to come home to roost, and it really is coming together with this Epstein case, because a lot of the MAGA base, the strong, die-hard MAGA base, they really believed that the Epstein files were the panacea, a beautiful book of criminal indictments and convictions for Democratic candidates and past presidents and so on and so forth. Little did they know that Trump was on the list and good friends with Epstein. And now Trump is coming out and saying that the list doesn't exist. That's crazy. All of this is undermining his credibility. All of this is going towards essentially people not believing him no more. And so as a result, Democrats are pushing back. Gavin Newsom is coming out. Cory Booker's coming out. You saw the Democrats in Texas flee with the redistricting they're trying to do. So Democrats are speaking out and pushing back. This is not the same Democratic Party that we saw in 2016.
Right.
This is an aggressive party that is aggressively pushing back against Trump and all these lies. And I think that we will be very successful in the midterm elections next year.
Okay. Right now, let's turn to the latest on the trade dispute between the United States and Canada. Some Canadian imports into the United States are now subject to 35% duties. That's a 10% increase on the tariffs that were announced in March. Although many goods are exempted by an existing free trade agreement, the move marks another ratcheting up of trade tensions. CGTN's Dan Williams has the latest from the Detroit-Windsor border.
The tariff war between the United States and Canada continues to deepen. It comes after the US President Donald Trump announced late last week fresh tariffs on neighbor Canada. But it appears the likely impacts from this latest round of tariffs could be limited. Last week, Trump signed an executive order that increased tariffs on Canadian goods to 35%, a 10% increase on the 25% rate that had been in effect since March. But it's expected that will only cover a small amount of goods. That's because the tariffs do not apply to goods already covered by the US-Mexico-Canada Free Trade Agreement, governing trade between the three countries. The Bank of Canada estimates 95% of goods that cross into the US are covered by that agreement. But for some Canadian companies, these latest tariffs will cause yet further disruption. And there are already other tariffs on specific sectors that will remain in place. That includes a 50% tariff on steel and aluminum, as well as 25% tariffs on cars and auto parts, while a new 50% tariff on some copper products also took effect last week. One issue that has cropped up: automakers in the UK and Japan are now subject to a lower tariff rate than those made in Canada or Mexico. That means cars imported from those countries, such as Rolls-Royce, Toyota and Honda, for example, are subject to a lesser tariff rate than those made in Canada or Mexico for American companies like Ford and GM. Trump has said the tariffs were imposed because Canada is not doing enough to stem the flow of fentanyl across the border. But Canada's Prime Minister Mark Carney says Canada only accounts for 1% of fentanyl entering the US. Canadian officials say they expect Carney and Trump to speak directly in the coming days. But what is clear for now is that these new tariffs mark a new escalation in the trade war between these two close allies and neighbors. Dan Williams, CGTN, Detroit.
Sourabh, Gupta, so there we have the situation in Canada, but Trump, in many instances, is also using tariffs as a foreign policy tool. He's threatening to penalize countries like Canada, for that matter, because it's said that it intends to recognize a Palestinian state. He's also threatened much higher tariffs on India because India continues to trade with Russia. I mean, what do you make of the use of tariffs for these foreign policy goals?
I think it's a self-goal at the end of the day. It's consumers who are paying the price out here. It's just not helping with allies and partners, the relationship. They're redoing their sums in terms of how much they should be depending on the United States. I think part of the reason we saw NATO, the European countries, saying that we will go to 5% GDP in terms of defense spending is actually to prepare for the day when the United States will not be there to help defend Europe, and so they're starting that process of being able to create a defense industrial base that is sufficient to protect themselves. I would say in the Indo-Pacific, the allies and partners are still, in spite of the tariffs, depending and hoping for the United States to remain there and secure and guarantee their security. It does not help that within the US government, there's been so much disruption within the National Security Council, and therefore decision-making is not very streamlined. But I think everybody's waiting on tenterhooks in that region, the Indo-Pacific region, as to what exactly will come out in the Trump administration's national defense strategy. And that might really double down on the Indo-Pacific region. So even as Mr. Trump is wishy-washy, I mean, they're facing whiplash in terms of tariff from Mr. Trump. They're hoping that at least the senior bureaucracy will manage to maintain a degree of continuity in terms of its emphasis on geopolitical matters. And hopefully that after a year or two, matters will tide over and there will be more continuity than discontinuity on the geopolitical front.
All right, Anthony Chan, as we are fully aware, there are all kinds of laws, rules, procedures that the president has to follow. when he makes these decisions, when he implements these policies. Now, on the use of tariffs for geopolitical ends, this is how the U.S. Trade Representative Jamison Greer responded to what the president is doing. Let's listen.
A lot of these are set rates pursuant to deals. Some of these deals are announced, some are not. Others depend on the level of the trade deficit or surplus we may have with the country. So these tariff rates are pretty much set.
But the president is kind of blending all these things together because he cited fentanyl once again when it came to the policy with Canada. He also said on social media, Canada's decision to back statehood for Palestine is going to make it hard for us to make a trade deal. How does that have anything to do with financial and trade agreements?
The President of the United States has his foreign affairs power, where he can manage relations under the Constitution with foreign countries. Congress delegated to the President the ability to take economic action in response to national emergencies in the International Economic Emergency Powers Act.
So, Anthony, I only got about a minute, but you have the trade representative there talking about an emergency. Is the country facing an economic emergency? Does that justify what the president is doing?
Absolutely not. And in fact, this is being reviewed and litigated in the courts right now. And it's not even clear whether the president will, in fact, win on this front. Of course, anything and any time that the president loses at these lower courts, things go to the Supreme Court, where he certainly has a more sympathetic audience. But the reality is that right now, to say that there is an emergency because we don't like what the courts are doing in Brazil is really stretching the legal framework. And I think the courts are going to be reviewing this and many other of the actions that the president has recently taken.
Mary, very quickly, I've got 30 seconds left. How do you see this play out?
Well, it's just brought a great deal of uncertainty to our foreign relations. And when you pick a fight with Canada, I mean, and manufacturing isn't going to come back to the United States overnight. Yeah. And we have so many relationships where we manufacture things and we get materials from other countries, right, that this is really going to do some damage, and the consumers will feel it.
Okay, and that is where we have to leave it. Thanks to all of you for being with us. That's it for this edition of The Heat. I'm Anand Naidu in Washington.